So welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Kaya Antley. I'm the chair of the AIAA Melbourne section of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And it is really our privilege today to host this webinar from Artemis II to the next era of human space flight with Honorary Pam Melroy. Pamela Melroy is a former NASA Deputy Administrator on behalf, and we're doing this on behalf of the Australian sections in Adelaide and Sydney as well. So the conversation will be guided by Dr. Catherine Grace from the Australian Space Agency. And as we gather here from Melbourne or Naarm, I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which I'm speaking, the Wurundjeri people and Wurrung people of the Kulin Nations, and also pay my respect to elders past and present. So this webinar on human space exploration, I also want to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of the first scientists and astronomers of this continent, whose knowledge of sky, country, and connection continues to guide us and inspire. I would like now to invite Professor Kees Biel, AIAA Region 7 Director, to say a few words about today's topic and also about AIAA. Thank you, Kees.
Thank you, Kaya. For those who are not familiar with the AIAA regional structure, Region 7 is the international region and covers all countries outside North America. We hold about 10% of the AIAA membership, but they're located in many countries around the world. I also like to add my welcome to everyone, including members from other regions, and also non-members who would like to take this opportunity to consider becoming an AIAA member. Now, on today's topic, we're on the eve of the launch of Artemis II, and I think this particular webinar is very timely, and it's an opportunity to review the overall Artemis program. In fact, Artemis II is the hinge point between proving NASA's new lunar architecture and eventually returning humans to the moon. It's the first step in the entire Artemis program, from lunar orbit, lunar landing, and eventually sustained presence. AIAA is proud to present this particular webinar on this topic and contribute to the Artemis program in terms of policy making, workforce development, and research and development. Now, I'd like to introduce the moderator of today's webinar, Dr. Catherine Grace. She is the Director, Civil Space Policy, Acting General Manager, National Space Capability at the Australian Space Agency, where she leads strategic policy development and cross-government partnership to advance Australia's national space ecosystem. Previously, she was Director Space at the South Australian Space Industry Centre, driving sector strategy, industry development, and international collaboration. Thank you, Catherine, for joining us and for moderating this webinar, and over to you.
A huge thank you. I really appreciate it. And it's, I just want to say what a privilege it is to be here today with everyone. So a big hello to colleagues from AIAA around the world. For a conversation that we're going to have today that's actually at a particularly consequential moment in human history, not just human spaceflight. Artemis II now clearly sits at the center of NASA's return to the moon strategy, but it's more than just the moon. It's where we're going beyond. We know that only weeks ago, NASA announced a significant rephasing of the Artemis program. And although the objectives remain unchanged, this sustained human presence, we can see what this step back means. And it's how Artemis is going to be a decision-shaping mission. And that brings me to our keynote speaker, who really needs no introduction, but who else would be more poised to bring us these insights into the themes than the incredible Colonel Pamela Melroy. It's my absolute honor to introduce Pam. She's someone who not only embodies the pioneering spirit of Artemis, but the power of international collaboration. Colonel Pam Melroy, we all know that you bring this remarkable perspective, not only operational excellence, leadership, but your future for the vision. I think it's Pam, you are only one of two women to ever command a space shuttle mission. And then, of course, you served as deputy administrator for NASA, and that's where really you've helped shape this Artemis mission and plans. It's not often in life that you get to speak with someone who's piloted spacecraft that have orbited the planet, who've managed programs, but you have this experience of leading as deputy director and bringing your insights to what it means to have a mission like Artemis, to getting it off the ground, but why it matters for the future. Guys, I could talk and fangirl about Pam for hours, but this is not the Catherine monologue. We're all here to hear from Pam, and we're absolutely privileged to have Colonel Melroy join us today, share her insights, understanding not only the nuts and bolts of a crude space program, but the bigger strategic picture, and how the success of Artemis II will light the way for our sustained presence on the moon and beyond. Please join me in extending a warm welcome, and Pam, over to you.
Well, thank you, Catherine. That was such a lovely introduction. I really appreciate it. I'm going to just share some charts with you. It's really just pictures to help tell the story. I also want to thank everyone here, but especially our organizers, because AIAA is such an important organization. I am a very proud member. In fact, I'm a fellow, and I sit on two committees, and it's just an amazing way to get to connect to other aerospace professionals, but also for career development as well. So I'm excited about this. Yes, this is a very, very timely subject indeed. I hope that I'm going to be able to drive my slides here. Let's see if I can. There we go. Actually, I think it's important to say Artemis 2 isn't the first step. The first step was Artemis 1. And that occurred in November of 22 when I was sitting actually as the NASA Deputy Administrator. And I can tell you it was a tough road to get there. And when you're flying a new rocket and it's a complex vehicle and a new spacecraft, there's always things that you learn. And we learned a lot in several attempts to launch. But one of the things that I also was very clear about was that it's going to take us a few tries. And we've already had at least one, right? We brought Artemis 2 back after a successful wet dress rehearsal, needed to come back and fix a helium leak problem. That's been fixed, and it was announced today that Artemis 2 is rolling back out from the vertical assembly building to the pad. And right now, NASA is shooting for April 1st as the first attempt. But it was an extraordinary experience to be there for that launch, but also to watch everything that went into it. But it's also important to know why Artemis 2 is so different. And I think the obvious thing, right, as you can just tell immediately, is there are people on board. But what's significant about that is there were decisions for cost and schedule that were made. Artemis 1 did not have an active environmental system on it. And so this is actually the first flight of the environmental system. And you will see in the profile, that is why a conscious decision was made to spend 24 hours loitering in Earth orbit just to make sure that that system didn't have any, basic infant mortality issues, anything, that was obvious right from the beginning to cause us to question whether it was okay to send the crew out. But it was also a great opportunity because they're loitering in orbit for 24 hours. They can perform a rendezvous and proximity operations demo with the upper stage. And this is the way you should be thinking about what the crew is doing is there's a long list of test objectives that they're trying to meet. And so the more test objectives you can achieve on this mission, the more you can attempt on the next mission. So having a crew on board does change everything. There's a lot more focus on safety. It's not just the environmental systems, it's also just being sure about the backup. But of course, I think what is significant also is that this will be the first mission where humans go outside of Earth orbit since 1972. And in addition to that, it will be the first time that a woman, a person of color, and a non-American has left Earth orbit. And these are all really significant things. And yet, I will just say that the way NASA does business today is just enabled this to happen. It wasn't, yes, there was a partnership with Canada that was an agreement, et cetera, but it was set up and structured very much like what we do with the International Space Station. NASA really never thought twice about whether this should be an international type of enterprise. I think we've learned the benefits of international partnership from the International Space Station. So, but the four lovely people, Reed, Victor, Christina, and Jeremy, that you see before you, will be making history in a lot of ways, but they are doing very serious business with regards to the test flight. So I mentioned already that Artemis II has gone through a successful wet dress rehearsal, been out at the pad, was rolled back for repairs to the helium system, which were successful. And so it's rolling out shortly for the first attempt on October 1st. I'm sorry, April 1st, wrong month. A little bit of an infographic, which you can find on NASA's website. And I also have a page with a few links that you might be interested if you wanted to know more. This mission is frequently compared to Apollo 8, which was the figure eight free return trip around the moon that was made by the Apollo crew. I think there's a lot of similarities to that, but I think there's actually, you might actually want to call it Apollo 8.5 or more. The proximity operations demonstration, rendezvous and proxops, such a critical part of all of these missions, testing out that equipment for the first time in a way that the crew will have to do. Yes, it's not the lander system that they'll be doing on subsequent missions, but they're actually testing out and getting real in-space data on that rendezvous and proximity, their sensors, their system, et cetera. And so that first 24 hours is going to be really critical. It is only a 10-day trip, but they will be going about 380,000 kilometers away from the Earth, which is pretty significant. I feel like that was something that a lot of people were just beginning to grasp. When I was on the space shuttle, when I was on the space station, you always knew you could come home within a few hours. And I think it really has landed hard on everybody how much planning you have to do. But there was a lot of robustness in the requirements for Orion. I worked on that program both inside NASA and at Lockheed Martin. And there were a lot of people who thought very carefully about the requirements for that. But the decision-making process when you have fewer options, I think is going to be a very significant part of this. So in addition to that, I think there's also an aspect of international integration by having an international partner involved. It's going to change things. And we're already laying in place a lot of the kinds of systems that we have with the International Space Station to allow us to have a joint relationship and a joint decision-making process where everybody gets to hear all the data and gets to have a voice. It is still going to be very much a first-time effort. And so, as we all know, it's not just the technical efforts, it's those integration efforts that can be incredibly challenging. So, I've been very focused, kind of like, at the micro level on Artemis II. But what is very important now is to kind of bring it all back up into the Artemis program. And so there's obvious differences with Apollo. The US is not doing it all alone. But I think also the goal of Apollo was to prove that the United States could put a man on the moon by the end of the decade and return him safely to Earth. That is a camping trip, and it was designed that way. There was very little support and resources for anything sustained. I think the other thing about it that was very interesting was people realized that there was going to be scientific benefits, and there were scientists and the astronauts were trained by geologists, but it was very much of a secondary kind of aspect of, this is about boots and flags and showing that we can actually do it using incredibly primitive technology. I mean, the computer that took the Apollo crews to the moon had 32 kilobytes of memory. It's incredible when you think about how primitive the technology was. This is very different. The goal of Artemis is to create a blueprint for sustained human presence and exploration throughout the solar system. And the purpose is to figure out how to set up a sustained presence on the moon, and then we are going to go try it on Mars and the next destination and the next destination. So the idea is to learn from doing when we're only 3 days away from Earth to figure out what it's really going to take to sustain people 6 months and even further deep into the solar system. And that is probably the principal difference. So the involvement of the crew at the very beginning, Artemis II is this is the first step towards this. And they will be doing science. And that is a significant purpose and reason why are we going out there? Is it just to wave flags and walk around? I can just tell you from the point of view of the astronauts, we consider ourselves explorers and scientists and engineers, and we want to learn new things and try new things and bring new knowledge back to Earth. And so there's a lot of focus on that, and there is plenty of science that can be done actually by the astronauts from lunar orbit. But one of the most important things is just to put the structures in place, like a chief scientist who's looking, and there's already discussions about, well, each lunar mission may have a different scientific focus. Maybe it's heliophysics, maybe it's lunar geology, maybe it's solar system formation, maybe it's the radio quiet environment that we can set up a radio telescope to look out into the solar system. But all of those pieces are there. And this is really what Artemis and Moon to Mars is about. So this is not just a conversation that we're having to say, yeah, we care a lot about these things. It is about preparing ourselves to go to Mars someday, and you can draw a direct line between the activities that are happening with one set of things that are happening on the moon directly to what we hope to use on Mars. The atmosphere is different, the gravity is different, there are significant differences, but there's also substantial similarities, particularly in the areas of operations, but also surprisingly in science. And this long duration and zero gravity, a trip to Mars is going to be spent a minimum of 6 months either direction doing that in microgravity. So then there's a partial gravity element to it. And how much gravity is enough to sustain the human system and keep our bones strong, et cetera. And the things that we already know that microgravity has some negative effects on the human body. So is the gravity of the moon enough to prevent that? Or will Mars, which has more gravity, be enough? We don't really know. But that idea that we still have to be very knowledgeable about the long durations in zero gravity, it's really important. We also know that mobile expedition is very important. It was 25 years of, of multiple rovers on Mars before the total distance traveled by those autonomous rovers equaled the distance that the Apollo astronauts traveled on the surface of the moon. Humans come with mobility, they come with edge computing, they come with massive amounts of power. Having that mobile expeditionary capability is what really maximizes the science. It allows us to get to different locations, take samples from a variety of places, and make real-time decisions. One of my favorite examples of that is that the first Mars Perseverance sample, when they took it, it was sandy, and so all of it just dribbled out of the container that they were trying to core sample. When they pulled it out, it all dribbled out. It took 2 days on the Earth to figure out that it happened. For a human, you know it happened immediately, and you can pivot and make different decisions. And we saw that even during the Apollo missions. The Genesis rock picked up by an astronaut who'd been trained by a geologist just said, hey, there's something there. That's the one we want to go get. Fission surface power. Power is incredibly important. It's going to be even more important on Mars because you're so much further away from the sun. The solar panels are much weaker. Learning to live off the land with in situ resource utilization, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a direct connection to everything that is happening on the moon to what we hope to do throughout the rest of the solar system. Now, it was mentioned recently that just last week there was a re-architecting of the mission. And so 2026 is going to be Artemis II. 2027 will be Artemis III, and that will be a docking with the actual lander, but will not go down to the surface. So that is, very similar to what happened Apollo 9, Apollo 10 didn't go all the way down to a landing, but did the simulations and did the docking exercises and basically burned down the risk in the system. So the hope is that 2028, with Artemis 4, 5, 6, and beyond, those will be our landing missions. And that's when we can begin to build a lunar base, have mobile transport systems, both a pressurized rover, the Japanese are building, a habitat the Italians are building, and then an unpressurized rover that will also be autonomous and can hopefully do science, but also move cargo around on the surface of the moon. I think it's important to talk about commercial partnerships. Right now, probably the most amazing aspect of the commercial partnership for Artemis is the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program, or CLPS. So we're seeing a LEO economy in space. It's going to take a longer road, I think, on the moon. But just like in space, the first real commercial business was around transportation, commercial rockets taking commercial payloads to space. These systems, and this is there have been failures and partial successes, but the Firefly Blue Ghost 1 mission was fully successful, taking a variety of very small payloads. This commercial transportation system is really in its infancy, but it's helping us prepare to scale and also just to study things like how the lunar dust gets kicked up with a lander. Those are going to be things that if we have a sustained presence are going to be really important. Commercial is going to be a little slower than low Earth orbit to get started, but it's going to be a critical part of the Moon to Mars activity that we do. And I have to say that the other thing that I think is really important is Apollo just rocked the world. But another thing that it did was it inspired an entire generation of scientists, engineers, and aviators like myself. I was very inspired by Apollo. I saw them land on the moon and I said, I'm going to be an astronaut. And so many of my colleagues are the same. That entire generation is beginning to tail off. We're all very worried about the future of STEM careers. We know that when we start to fly men and women and people of color and people from all over the world to the moon, it is going to have that same impact on the STEM careers of the future. It will inspire a whole new generation to follow and to be with us in this space industry. So I do want to leave plenty of time for questions here, but I wanted to drop a couple of these links that you can take a look at. The Artemis II press kit has the, a deep description of the mission. There's a blog that will keep you up with what's going on, especially around launch countdown. NASA has also developed a tool where you can go in and track where Artemis is real time during the mission. And the other thing that I recommend is if you're interested in the really big picture of the architecture, there's some tremendous resources, a lot of white papers that talk about why'd we pick this, why did we do this way, what are the big drivers, and so forth in the decisions. And those white papers are very accessible. They're about 3 to 5 pages long, but they will give you so much background on what the challenges and the trades are in this architecture. So we really are on an amazing journey, and it amazes me sometimes to think, wow, I mean, I was a kid watching all this. So now to be a part of it and to see it happening again, but happening in a way that every single person who is on this call will have a chance to participate. And in the future, if not you, your children will have the opportunity to go to the moon, go to Mars, and to travel the solar system. I mean, that's a pretty incredible legacy. This is what we thought, I think, was going to happen after Apollo, and we're finally ready for it. So very, very exciting time. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Pam. Catherine, would you continue with the questions, and perhaps then we can check if anything is in the Q&A section as well. Thank you.
Absolutely, Kaya. But let me just take a breath and then hopefully speak for everyone just listening to you now, Pam. And wow. Thank you so much for sharing not only your perspectives, but also that really personal story of you've seen it, and you feel it, and now you're living it, and you're seeing the next generation. And I think this is a weird reflection, but as you grow up, as you see things happening in your life, and you look at the next generation, you think, we're going to see you up there. That's just so exciting and marvelous, Pam. I want to say thank you for mentioning two really important points. One, the importance of Artemis I to get us to 2. But also, you mentioned Apollo 11. And I think that's something people do need to get in their mind is the sequence of things. It wasn't a first shot. It took us quite a few tries to get to 11. And so this is what I'm going to lean in with this sequencing question, Pam. You mentioned again, it was a couple of weeks ago, that there was this reshaping of the cadence of Artemis II and what we're expecting from the astronauts. And you really mentioned the importance of test and safety. So in your view, can you share what prompted NASA to make these changes and made it feel that this step was necessary now?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a couple things to unpack there. The first step was to say Artemis 3 wasn't going to be the first landing. And I think the best way I can describe that is to say that the agency was trying to pack Apollo 7, 8, 9, and 10 basically into Artemis 2. And as a test pilot, one of the things that we do is we take a look at the test objectives and we also rank them in terms of hazard. And it's it's easy to think. I've heard people say, "Gosh, they got so close on Apollo 10. They were like 50 miles. They should have just gone for it." And I'm like, "No, no, no, no. Trust me." There were actually real technical reasons why that really, truly, the vehicle was not ready for a landing. But there's a limit to how much risk you can pile onto any one mission. And I would say that in the administrators and my reviews, we saw very clearly that Artemis 3 was going to have too many new test objectives. So we asked about how we could pull forward as many of the test objectives to Artemis 2 as possible. And hence you see the rendezvous and the ProxOps demonstration. It's going to give us a lot more experience with that. But having said that, I think especially because we still have yet to see the lander do a successful uncrewed landing and liftoff from the moon, it's just not clear that a lander is going to be ready to demonstrate those objectives by the time Artemis 3 occurs. So I think that was really the driver there. And I think it makes a lot of sense. It was, it was a strong appetite and there was a lot of excitement and it was a long way away. So it was pretty easy to build a very aggressive profile that when people started to look at it, they went, yeah, this is going to be pretty dangerous. So let's moderate our aspirations. It's dangerous enough as it is. Let's just try to take a reasonable amount of risk on each flight. The change to the upper stage, I think, is a very interesting change. Uh, I think it's important to know that one of the really critical aspects of the Moon to Mars strategy is a recognition that there will be an evolution in the architecture. It is going to be dynamic. Things are going to come and go. Stuff isn't going to work out. Stuff is going to work out far better than we expected. It doesn't change the why and what we're trying to achieve. So I think everybody fully expects that as there's knowledge. I mean, for example, when I was deputy administrator, Vulcan hadn't flown yet, and its upper stage was unproven. And so, well, actually, no, that's true. They had one test flight with an anomaly, but it was still not, I would say, relatively nascent. So that idea of replacing the EUS with a commercial upper stage, there wasn't enough confidence yet that that could happen. I think it will help in some ways. It may be more challenging for some of the missions down the road not to have the extra throw weight. But what's important is that the goals and the objectives that you're trying to achieve don't change. How you achieve them you should be dynamic and resilient to different systems as they come in.
Pam, so insightful. I think that's almost the press release we need there, right? It's about risk, safety, appetite, and moderating our ambitions. But you really touched on it perfectly when you mentioned that it's this international element, and that as we're revising these sequences, we sort of need to prove and demonstrate that we're set up for success for the next sequential mission. So when we're thinking about that, that confidence, that safety, is this pace going to be driven by our integration readiness? Is it this moderation of our aspiration? What, with that revised sequence in mind, what do you think we really need to demonstrate? And is it just safety?
Yeah, I think it's a really big difference in mindset. I sort of broke down in the Moon to Mars strategy the different things that we had to learn. And in the transportation and habitation systems, which is what everybody focuses on, right? Because, I mean, if you don't have a transportation system, none of your other objectives really matter. But having said that, it isn't just about that transportation system. But I think we have a lot of experience in human spaceflight. I mean, this is what's preparing us to be ready. Not only did we have decades of flying the space shuttle, which taught us how to launch routinely, but also people for longer duration on the ISS. And now these new transportation systems have taught us to think a little bit more flexibly about those transportation. What do we have to prove? What's really, a deal breaker in the end? But there's also operations. And there was a big transition when we went from short duration flights on the space shuttle to 6 month, 4 to 6 month flights on ISS. And the cadence and the rhythm, what you're talking about with operations is what's the most efficient and effective way to use human beings in this kind of mission cadence and scenario. We have a lot to learn about surface operations, and we're also coming backwards from long duration flights that we've mastered on ISS back to these tight, dramatic, short duration flights where the decision-making process is so compressed. I'm not saying that NASA's forgotten it, but frankly, they haven't done missions like the Space Shuttle, those shorter duration missions for, well over a decade. Well, we're getting up to, beyond that. And it's just, I think there's a lot of aspects of that. We also really need to understand how our infrastructure is going to operate. I saw there was a question about communications. That's actually, to me, the most important infrastructure of all, because everything hinges on it. You cannot help the crew stay alive and stay safe if they have a problem on the moon if you can't talk to them. So you've got to, it's like the most important safety system of all. And so all of those aspects of infrastructure. But then we're also going to be learning how to do humans to do science. And we're going to have to reinvent field science, I think, for them to be successful. Anyway, that's a lot. I could talk about this forever. So I know my answers are too long, but those are the things I'm thinking about.
Pam, your answers are never too long. To get even a fraction of your insights, it's just, it really is moving. And I want to pick up on something, you mentioned it in your talk and you brought it up again now. And I just have to say, I love this, right? Because right now we're in this era of large language models and AI everywhere. You mentioned quite clearly and repeatedly the importance of humans, right? Humans are the real-time decision makers. Now with these shortened span durations, it's tight decisions, the importance of calm. This is where I want to pick your brain on the human aspect if I can, Pam. So, test flight pilot, astronaut, leader. In your mind, what's shaped and how do you build these high performance teams in these high stakes environments? High stakes environments, yeah.
Yeah, this is as old as NASA. The way you do it is by practicing, and it's simulations. They're better. You can do tabletop scenarios, but there's nothing quite like sitting in a simulator and having a failure occur, and then you and the ground have to work it out for yourselves because all the evil instructors are sitting in the back laughing at you because they know what they did, but you don't yet, and you have to figure it out, and you have to figure it out on the fly. And I remember on my first mission, we were the first flight of the common berthing mechanism for the space station. And so there was understandably a lot of focus on it. And then we got to a point where once we'd really kind of wrung out all the failure scenarios, we had to kind of stop the scenario where the common birthing mechanism failed because it was mission ending. And I don't think anybody fully appreciated that until we had done enough scenarios. And then everybody's like, okay, we got it. We we've tried to fail it every way that we can in testing and in the simulator, but we're going to stop doing this in our mission now that we've got really good procedures for what we'll do, because frankly, it just kept ending the mission. And then we'd have to go, all right, let's start the simulation all over again and start from the beginning. And those, that's what you want. You want test pilots say, plan for everything because the thing you didn't plan for is going to happen. And what that really means is you know, the more you think through, the more pieces of a problem you might be able to stitch and assemble together in the thing that happened that you weren't expecting. And I've absolutely seen that happen on orbit as well, where we're like, okay, well, this is not exactly this failure, but there was that section where we had to recover this element. And then maybe if we did this and we did that, we could stitch all these procedures together and solve the problem. And that is really necessary. And it's also how you build up the judgment that extends to your own crew, what they can do, what the ground can see, what they can't see. That in real hands-on knowledge that only comes with being right there in front of a piece of broken hardware. So yeah, it's interesting. I think AI could be a really good tool, especially on the way to Mars or on a lunar habitat for monitoring for things and seeing failure scenarios well before they actually occur. But I mean, how do you train an AI the same way you train a human, right? You have to teach them.
I'm going to distill that and take it away, Pam, that high performance, high stress environments, be prepared, just keep going, keep trying, but don't catastrophize because there's only so much you can prepare for.
Right.
Right. And I'm
That's
going to
right.
do that when I pick my outfits in the morning. Catherine, there's only so much you can prepare for. Trust your team.
Right.
Pam, one more quick one before we jump to the audience. And it has to do with our careers, our young professionals, the people joining us. I'd love if you were able to share with us mindsets or perhaps habits that can make the biggest difference to someone not necessarily wanting to be an astronaut, but just wants to contribute, whether they're engineers, the operators, program leads. What can you share that would really be a great habit or mindset? And please don't tell me it's waking up at 4 a.m. to go for
Yeah.
a run, Pam.
Yeah. No, it's actually it's something that the longer I go, the more I realize what a difference it makes, and how it differentiates people who are good at their job from people who become great. And that is curiosity. You don't have that, well, gee, that was weird. Okay. And then just press on. No, you stop and say, I don't understand that. This is not even my discipline, and I get it. But can somebody please explain this to me? Because in the end, especially in something as complicated as human spaceflight, it is profoundly interdisciplinary, right? It's all these systems that have to work together. It's, systems engineering on steroids, because now you're talking about people as a part of the system, and people on the ground and people in space. And and all of it has to work together. That curiosity is what enables you to pull the threads that you see dangling and not just kind of be passive and say, hey, that's not my system. That's somebody else's problem. I don't need to know about it. That's actually not how a complex system works. And so having that curiosity, that constant curiosity, and to learn about things that may be outside of formally, well, you've been given this one piece of hardware to work on. Don't stop there. Be interested, learn new things, and constantly be curious. Well, why is that? Why did you say that? Why do you think that's not a safety problem? And those kinds of things. So it's having that constantly interested and curious personality that is what is going to take you to the top.
Oh, Pam, like moved and I got goosebumps. And I gotta say, after this, I'm gonna call my mom in Toronto and I'm gonna say, Mom, remember when I was a kid and I annoyed you with why for everything?
Why?
But why is it
Yes.
snowing? But why is it winter? But why are we human? I think that's something everyone here can take to heart. And as we're adults and we find ourselves in environments where people are like, stay in your lane, focus. I
Hmm.
think this idea of course, be focused, be an expert, but do it with an openness and curiosity so that you can contribute to greatness. Gosh, Pam. Wow. Um, I know there's so many people with so many things to ask you. I can see the chat going off. I'll hand over to Kai now to look through some of our audience questions. But Pam, thank you.
Thank you both. I think that it's a great conversation, and I totally agree about curiosity, and I think it's extremely important. And I'm quite sure that a lot of curious people here, especially because we have quite a few questions. Maybe we can start with the first one in the Q&A. How important do you feel it's for Australia to have an appropriate level of sovereign resilience in space capability?
Wow. Well, yeah, it's a little off the topic of Artemis, but having said that, space is entering every single discipline and profession. It's having a massive impact on um, things like, fishing, agriculture, homeland security, global logistics. Just about everything that you can imagine is beginning to get data from space. It's global, ubiquitous data, and that has an impact on every single profession, everything. And as a result of that, I think uh, constantly having to pay another country for a level of knowledge that you would like from a sovereign perspective, at some point becomes a real problem. And, of course, I'm, a little bit wearing my defense hat right now, but I think it is really important to have the sovereign capability to build satellites and to launch them and to develop the payloads that you need so that you can support your industry and all the things that they want to do and the aspirations they have. Otherwise, you're just offshoring the money to get that information and data and that capability. And I mean, it'd be like if you just decided to pay somebody to, I don't know, do the internet for you forever with no IT specialists. You were just paying somebody else to do everything. That's the same kind of thing. It has such a big impact on every discipline and every industry. You've got to have sovereign capability.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Maybe the second question will go back to Artemis and astronauts. How does the Artemis program select astronaut candidates worldwide? And do individual countries choose or nominate them, or does the Artemis program select them directly?
Yeah, well, if you understood astronaut selections, you could be a billionaire if you lived in Houston, Texas. Trust me, it's complicated. It is very complicated. I think it's not as complicated maybe as I'm making it sound, but it does end up getting there because you're looking at a relatively small pool of people, and you go, okay, you break down the mission. So I'll give you a really good example. You got to stop and think about this. The early Artemis missions that are going to the surface of the moon, right now the plan is that two people stay in Orion and two people go down on the lander. Okay, got it. So I could train those people. You're landing the lander. You're the backup in the lander. You're the primary in Orion, and you're the backup in Orion. What if somebody gets sick? What if the person who is supposed to be the commander going down to the surface of the moon gets sick? Or something comes up, right? That they literally just aren't able to go and conduct that mission. So you have to kind of have this dense matrix of capabilities and training. And so, for example, you're doing rendezvous and prox ops. That is still to an astounding level of a hands-on flying exercise. And you have to have a lot of intuition about the flying, which is not easy in space. It's not like flying an airplane, but you can get there. Those of us who've done a lot of formation flying and that kind of thing, you have some level of intuition about it when you get close, but it's pretty complicated. And so starting to look at like how many test pilots do we need, and does everybody need to have flown in space at least once? Should somebody have actually been a commander before they're going on this mission for the first time? So all of those things will go into that. And, when you start to go out and do EVAs on the surface of the moon, do you have EVA experience? Those kinds of things all get factored in. The international partners, essentially, there's an agreement between the nations that has to do with to what extent that country has contributed to the architecture. And there's a way of measuring that. You can see that NASA knows how to evaluate and say, how much would this cost for us to develop it ourselves, or operate this system? But that partner is going to do it for us because it's quite expensive to send people and train them. And so at some point, there's got to be value given to the architecture for doing that. In the case of Canada, they're providing a robotic arm to the gateway system, and have also discussed with us some of the other things that they'd like to do on the surface. And so those kinds of arrangements come with seats. And so then it gets, certainly the host country, the international partner is going to probably have a few candidates, and there will be a pretty extensive consultation between the chief of the astronaut office in that country and the chief of the astronaut office in the United States at NASA to look through people's qualities, characteristics, their training, what they're prepared to do, what they have done previously, et cetera, et cetera. And then, but I think everybody is still holding their breath right up to the last minute when they make these announcements.
Thank you for elaborating this actually quite complicated procedure. But maybe we can go to the third question in the Q&A from a planetary geologist. So how do you build the multidisciplinary mindset required to help humanity in the era of space exploration? I think it's a great question in the notion of STEM and all other disciplines.
Yeah, that is a really great question. It's one I'm very passionate about because I was just really surprised at the way science at NASA got funded. It was kind of like, well, last year your budget for this was X, so it's X plus 2%. And I think it was aggravated by the fact that the way science is selected at NASA is through a consultation with the Academy. So the National Academy will do a very extensive discussion with the entire community focused on what are the most important questions in this discipline that are prioritized, and then notional missions that would be able to at least partially or completely answer those questions. But they're done by discipline. So my question was to our head of science, well, the planetary budget's bigger than heliophysics. So what if the third thing on the list in heliophysics doesn't have enough money to get funded, but it's better science than the seventh thing in planetary, which does get funded? And there wasn't an easy answer to that. One of the things that I think is really important, and I'm going to continue to advocate for, is that through that decadal survey process that the National Academies does, is to actually just ask people to look at science that is multidisciplinary and has the greatest impact. I mean, just stop for a minute and look at what James Webb Space Telescope is doing across all of our disciplines. But it was funded by astrophysics, and that's the way the system works. I think we can break down the mental barriers in disciplines if there is interdisciplinary money. Because really, in the end, people are just arguing, well, my good idea needs to be funded. And if there is money that prioritizes good interdisciplinary ideas, well, guess what? People are going to start working together.
I think this is a wonderful message for the end. I'm very cautious of our time, and I think that the message really is that it's important to collaborate and to collaborate also in an interdisciplinary way. So thank you so much, Pam, and also thank you, Catherine. It was really an inspiring conversation. Today's discussion really reminds us to the new era of human spaceflight is not only about missions and technology, but it's also about collaboration, as already mentioned, and a shared purpose, and the people behind all these extraordinary events. On behalf of the AIAA Melbourne and the Australian sections, I really warmly thank Honorary Pam Melroy for sharing her experience and insights, and Dr. Catherine Grace for guiding the conversation so thoroughly. And now it's really my pleasure to introduce Lisa Vitaris, AIAA Strategic Advisor in the Pacific, and also Bid Director for AIC 2029 Houston, who will say a few words. Thank you. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Kaya. Hi, everyone. So I'm Lisa Vitaris. I joined AIAA last November, and previously I served as Director of IAC 2025 Sydney at Space Industry Association of Australia, where I was also interim CEO for 9 months. Firstly, I'd just love to thank Pam and Catherine for their excellent insights into Artemis II and the future of lunar exploration. It was absolutely an honor to have both of you here talking to everyone, so thank you so much. And thanks also to our AIAA Australia team in bringing this webinar together, Kaya, Case, Patty, Nimish, and Tasha as well. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I just have two exciting updates to share from my end. So AIAA is growing internationally, and two of my colleagues are leading expansion in the EMEA region. And as Kaya said, I've joined as strategic advisor for the Indo-Pacific region, focusing on growing AIAA's presence here. And within our region, Australia is currently the only country with AIAA sections in Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide, which makes Australia an absolutely key priority for us. For members here, it means a stronger focus on bringing the best of AIAA to Australia, including more opportunities to participate in AIAA's technical committees. Pam mentioned she's on 2 of them, so you might want to get on some of those. Expanded pathways for students and young professionals, and a broader range of events with high caliber speakers in person, hybrid, and online. And the second piece of news is that AIAA recently announced that we are bidding to host the International Astronautical Congress in Houston in 2029. And if we're successful, it'll mark the 60th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, and it'll take place during an extraordinary period in space exploration, as you've just heard about, following the return of humans to the moon through the Artemis program. So after my time as Director of IAC 2025 Sydney, I'm now serving as Bid Director for IAC 2029 Houston, alongside my work supporting AIAA's growth in the Indo-Pacific. So it's an incredibly exciting moment for space, and organisations like AIAA really play an important role in bringing the global space community together. So with that, I'll hand back to Kaya to close our webinar. Thanks, Kaya.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Really, we hope this conversation has left you with some inspiring ideas. And yes, please stay connected with AIAA through our events, maybe even technical activities, publications, and also our local events. If you're not yet a member, here are some links for you to look at in a chat. We would be really delighted to welcome you in our community. We are present on LinkedIn as AIAA Melbourne section, and AIAA itself has their own pages as well as other colleagues in our sections. We also got an Instagram account as a Melbourne, and you can find the Instagram accounts for the main AIAA. And yeah, all the information are available on the main website that you can see also in a chat. So thanks again, and thank you so much, all organizers, for helping us. And have an enjoyable day wherever you are, or good evening to those in different time zones. Thank you. Enjoy and see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.